fortunate today to have Andy Bailey, Chief Executive Officer of the SH-130 Limited Liability Company, which is operating the concession for the SH-130 right here in Central Texas. A really interesting topic for us to hear about as the promise and potential of a large, huge infrastructure initiative is in the ether. We're all waiting for it. And the role of the private sector in infrastructure is imagined to play a key role. And so what better time to hear about the role of the private sector than right now with an example in our own backyard. So I'd like to introduce our speaker, Andy.
Okay.
So he studied urban affairs at Virginia Tech as an undergraduate, and then went on to earn a Bachelor's of Business Administration at Virginia Commonwealth University. And he began his career at the Virginia DOT, where he ultimately rose to the position of Commissioner of Operations, Engineering, and Construction. So kind of a key role in the organization, and served for 25 years at Virginia DOT. When he left, apparently retirement was not an option because he's had quite an active career since then, working for Berger Services, another large engineering and construction services firm, and served in a number of key roles delivering infrastructure programs in some really interesting places. He was the in-country manager of the Iraq Reconstruction Program, where he oversaw the non-industrial sectors initiatives, managing about $4 billion worth of projects. And he was also frequently deployed to the South Sudan, where he led the infrastructure services program there for the USAID. So we're really interested to hear what he has to say about his current position at the SH-130, where he's been for the last year and change, helping the concession come out of bankruptcy.
Well, thank you. Look, I just want to explain why I put this slide up. Jean-Claudia shared that I have a Bachelor of Arts in Urban Affairs. And at Virginia Tech, that was the school for wandering souls. I'd already gone through math, geography, and English as potential majors. When it got time for me to leave school, I just looked at all the credits I had and I realized that, hey, urban affairs fit me. But once I got there, it really inspired me to do a lot. It broadened my education in ways I couldn't imagine. But I left school. It was at a very bad time to find a job. Ended up with the Department of Transportation, the Highway Department at the time, as an inspector trainee. They were teaching me advanced math skills about adding fractions and dividing to the third decimal point and different types of stuff, but it gave me an opportunity to start getting out and doing stuff. So I've been very fortunate throughout my life, and I've had a lot of things that I've been able to do that I sit here and I'm constantly amazed. And so when people ask me about the things I've done, I want to share what's behind this picture. The Agency for International Development is a Kennedy administration organization. It was put together to support developing countries, to bring them to democracy, help them rise, and overcome the terrors of communism. In South Sudan, USAID was supporting the development of the world's newest country, essentially. There had been a comprehensive peace agreement after more than 40 years of civil wars. They were in there. We were providing all types of infrastructure. And like a lot of good stories that guys tell, this one starts as, well, we were sitting beside the Nile drinking a beer. And we were talking about a persistent problem in Juba, which is the national capital. That persistent problem was during rainy seasons. There was a tremendous number of infant and early childhood deaths due to waterborne diseases, particularly watery diarrhea, malaria, and some other things that come from having the type of water there. And we were just sitting around. There was an engineer and myself, and we started popping ideas. And our idea was, well, people collect water at the Nile. They collect it out of ditches. They collect it wherever they can find it, and it's not good water, so let's treat that water. So we partnered with some non-governmental organizations and USAID and us, and we built a small-scale facility. So behind this is a couple of water tanks where we would just throw chlorine in it to dose it out and let it settle and clean, and then we'd filter it. Nothing high-tech. But the next rainy season, the Juba Hospital had no recorded infant deaths due to waterborne illnesses. So it's something that, you know, a guy like me, a highway department guy, someone that didn't know what he was going to do when he got out of school, has just been given all kinds of opportunities to be involved and do different things. So that's me. How many of you guys have actually been out and worked for a government of any type? How many have been involved with the private sector in different ways? Yeah. Okay. Are there any engineers in the room? Okay. Well, I hate to tell you, but you're surrounded. I've worked with engineers all my life, and I love them to death, but this thing on my head, in front of my head, is because of dealing with engineers. Anyway, a little bit about SH-130 Concession Company. We operate 41 miles of private toll road. We're actually segments 5 and 6 of SH-130. Segments 1 through 4 are by TxDOT. Ours are privately owned. It is the first privately owned toll road developed in Texas under a comprehensive development agreement, and I'll kind of get into that, what that means a little later. Under the agreement we have with Texas, they own the rights of way that we've bought. They own the pavements and the bridges that we constructed. They own the air rights above, the air rights beside, and the air rights side. So when we're out there on the road, we're breathing TxDOT air. We have a 50-year concession agreement, and I'll go into a little more detail as we go along here. Timeline of this. The facilities concession agreement, which is a master agreement. It gives us rights, it gives us a lease, it makes our obligations on what we're going to build, when we're going to build it, how we're going to toll. It just governs every aspect of our life. Was signed in 2007. It opened in 2012. It filed for bankruptcy in March 2016. And I'll talk a little bit about this bankruptcy because it's how I got involved in the road. And then last June, we emerged from bankruptcy under a new ownership structure. I had been supporting the lenders through bankruptcy and was asked to come on as the CEO to get it through bankruptcy. And let me tell you, I worked for a year or more, maybe 15 months, supporting the lenders on this project, and even being intimately aware and involved in everything, it didn't prepare me, and it gave me a moment, a talking heads moment, when I showed up the morning that we emerged from bankruptcy and realized, one, we had pulled it off, we'd converted the IT, we'd converted all of this, but then I got to open the curtain and see what was in there, and geez, it was scary. It was really scary. So I want to put public-private partnerships, P3s, in a little bit of context for you. As our country developed, particularly on the East Coast, there were large land grants that were provided to the aristocracy. They started wanting people to cross people wanted to cross their land, so they started building turnpikes and toll roads that were privately owned and operated. Somewhere in the middle of the 19th century, government started taking more responsibility for building roadways, particularly through poll taxes and other types of taxing where you were either worked on the road for a certain number of days a year, or you paid a tax associated with it. But it gradually moved away from privately owned. And through entering into the 20th century, roads were mainly provided by local governments and state governments. There was very little federal involvement in transportation through the early part of the 20th century. And then General Eisenhower, as he was leading Allied forces in Europe, started to understand how Germany could mobilize so many resources to attack the neighbors and overcome Europe because of their transportation system. Everything in Germany at the time moved on rail or roads, and the fastest was on roads. He came back, started advocating for a defense highway system, which became our interstate system. So then you had a lot of federal involvement in the transportation network, a lot of commitment behind it, dollars behind it. But then we hit this era, and I believe I'm part of that era of the everyone's a self-made person in this country. You know, forget the fact that I went to the best public schools in the world. We had the best public infrastructure in the world. We were all self-made guys, and being self-made guys, we didn't need a government. We wanted to reduce the size of it, and one way to reduce the size of it is you choke off its resources. So we had no taxes, we don't want to pay for this, and everybody could get a free lunch. And so that meant that the organizations, the entities that have provided our public transportation system, our water, our sewer, our public buildings, our schools, became very cash-strapped. And we started looking around for who else could come in and help us deliver these services. So go back to the interstate system. Dwight Eisenhower had a vision. He would connect all of the state capitals in the 48 states with high-speed modern roads. And just as a fact to tuck in the back of your mind, on a rural section of interstate, they were designed for right-of-way acquisition and construction, slopes laid back, so they could serve as landing strips for B-52 bombers in the event of an all-out war. So, but that was what they did. And if you look at what 1957 was on I-35, it's a road, and there are not very many people on it. There are not a lot of people that are traveling from Dallas down here to Austin. And it was serving that purpose. But as it grew, it became it enabled the development along the roadway. And over the first 20 years, it was interstate, and over the next 20 years, it became very much a commuter route around these urban nodes, Austin being one of them. And so anybody that can look out the window, myself included today, coming back I-35, there's always something that will slow you down. So my first involvement in public-private partnerships was in, I think, 1988 or 1989. Virginia had elected a governor on a transportation program. He had pushed through large tax increases, the largest in the state's history. He had pushed through bonding authority for the state and for local governments if they wanted to take it. He had created new organizations to focus on rail and public transit. He had done a lot of stuff, and one of the other pieces of legislation that came out of that was something called the Highway Corporation Act. And that allowed private developers to build, operate, and maintain roads. It was under the SCC, the State Corporation Commission, which is a public services commission, the Highway Department and its Transportation Commission, or board now, which had been the most powerful board in the state, took umbrage, and later they changed that to the Public-Private Transportation Act, took it away from the SCC, and embedded everything in the Department of Transportation. The reason that we started it was there was an overwhelming need in Virginia for transportation. We couldn't afford to do it. We couldn't do everything ourselves. We wanted to bring in the private sector. And it was at a time where there was a lot of talk about letting governments act more like the private sector. Unleash them, bring in this. They can do things quicker, faster, better. So we said, okay, let's put it in our toolbox. And the other thing that they are supposed to do is to relieve governments of tax obligations so that the tax dollars you do have can do more with them. It's not always happened that way, but that's what they should be doing. As an outsider, I realize Ann Richards died in the early 1990s, but she was always motherhood and guns and all, and it was 90s was a pretty dynamic period in Texas. It was across the country, but it really resounded here. Your economy boomed. NAFTA had come through and passed, and everybody had this grand vision that NAFTA was just going to open up the heartland of the U.S. to Canada, to Mexico, and it would just drive all kinds of economic growth. The picture of I-35, every place that had an urban center with roads were being congested. We just weren't keeping track of anything. And then Texas started looking at its funding sources. And I can guarantee you, if you ask a highway department guy if he ever has enough money, there's one answer you're going to hear. Anybody know what that is? So keep this map in mind, because the seeds of the failure are sown on this map. And it doesn't share what it is. There was a dream. Governor Perry embraced that dream and advocated that dream of what was called the Trans-Texas Corridor. It would link up essentially Laredo or El Paso to Oklahoma and the rest of the Midwest and heartland of the country. And it would do a lot of things. This is only the I-35 alignment, where they looked at 5 to 6 different types of alignments. They also had an I-69 alignment, an I-40. There were like 4 different alignments with 5 different options. Each option was 1,200 feet wide, so that it could accommodate a road, rail, and pipelines, transmission pipelines. Okay? 1,200 feet. Now keep that in context. That's not quite a quarter of a mile, but it's more than a fifth of a mile, right? And through this corridor, you've got 5 of them. So you got a mile wide there. It was also a 50-year, $175 billion undertaking. That's, over $3 billion a year or something. Who knows what TxDOT's budget is, roughly? It's about $9 billion a year. So about 1/3 of TxDOT's budget would have been devoted to this road. And there's a rule in highway departments, it's called 1, 2, 3. The one idea you have is going to take twice as long to do, and it'll cost 3 times as much. Okay? So it was a grandiose idea. It was a great idea. The Trans-Texas Corridor was and remains an important project for Texas, but it's a hugely important project or undertaking for the United States as a whole. But it's not going to happen anytime soon. There was legislative language in 2003 which allowed comprehensive development agreements, and I'll spend a moment on that, that allowed private sector folk to come in and propose on a comprehensive development agreement and then study options and choose and then go forward. So a comprehensive development agreement says essentially that you have the option as a developer, as a private sector developer, to come and identify a project and propose ways to finance that project, how you're going to design it and build it. Once you do that, how you're going to operate it, how you're going to toll it. And so there were several actual CDAs awarded for this corridor. TxDOT started building the 130 alternative to all of those different lines on the map as originally to see test of concept for tolling and moving traffic, and it was abundantly successful. So 5 and 6 became the next one, but they had a series of CDAs that were awarded going all the way up to the Y at Dallas, just outside of Dallas. Those failed for different reasons or never progressed for different reasons. Certainly very different from what happened here, but we had a an international player, Ferrovial. They are a Spanish company that develops large-scale infrastructure. As the European Union was being created, they kind of carved off that piece of industry and business for Spain to lead, and there are 3 or 4 large Spanish companies in this market. Their subsidiary, Centra, which is an operating company that operates toll roads, they operate Heathrow, they operate all kinds of stuff around the world, came in, and they hooked up with Zachary, which is one of the largest construction firms historically in Texas. And they competed and were successful in getting a concession that essentially was for the Trans-Texas corridor south of Austin towards San Antonio. And they could look at all kinds of projects. They could have looked at feeder roads, they could look at the main line, they could look at rail lines, they could do anything under the CDA. Well, they chose a road section to build. So you saw I-35 through Austin. I don't have my pointer with me, but if you look up here at the piece in red, that's sections 5 and 6. 1 through 4 are the piece that arcs out to the left. TxDOT started that, got ahead of it. There was the first 6 sections were about 90 miles of a 400+ mile corridor. And it was abundantly successful from the day the first section opened on 1 through 4. It was hugely successful. And our segments of the roadway, 5 and 6, were what we focused on. So we went through a competitive process. We were awarded the rights to a CDA. Once you get the rights to a CDA, you have to select a project. You go through a process of negotiating that project and reaching the facility's concession agreement. And then all the fun really starts. But how many people understand senior secured debt? Okay, good. Because until about 2 years ago, all I knew is that when I bought my house, I had to secure the mortgage for the property. Look, I'm going to just make an editorial statement here, and you can ignore it or not. There's too much money, too much value taken out at financial close on these jobs. There's too much reward for people that all they've done is figure out how to finance this. And at that point in time, there's no true intrinsic value. And that's changed over time. And I know through our refinancings and or our exit facility and all, there was a lot more demand to focus on getting the funds efficiently and moving forward, and I think that will happen. But historically, you know, it's like the Bain brothers burning dollar bills, celebrating when these have been done traditionally. All right. There are 3 classes here that I'm going to talk about. I'll probably say swaption at some point. Somebody can come knock me upside the head. But there are 3 classes of funding that goes into these deals. The lowest and foundational class is called equity. So Centra and Zachary, Ferrovial, Zachary, those 2 enterprises came together. And upon the award of the CDA and the signing of the FCA, they committed immediately $65 million as a payment to TxDOT. They were then required to pay for the acquisition of all right-of-way and a relocation of all utilities. Those payments from the parents, from the company, was an equity payment. You want to start a job, I'm going to put $1 million in this job so I can buy stuff, so I can create things and do things. That becomes equity. It's really, really expensive money. Very expensive. The next piece is the $686 million of senior secured debt. Now, when you think back, secured debt means I'm borrowing this money and I have to put up a collateral against that loan. So if I fail to pay off the loan, those debtors are protected. They get my asset. So in the case of your house, you buy a house, or a car, you buy a car, you don't pay your loans, it gets repossessed. Well, under this, what the company owns in all of this deal that's been done is a concession, a 50-year concession to operate and maintain that roadway. But that's what was the collateral that was put forward to secure the senior loans. Does that make sense? I mean, it confuses me. Yes, ma'am.
Could you go back to why Century Zachary had to pay the $65 million?
Okay. Yeah, sure. And that's a really good question. TxDOT is every government wants the new guy coming in to have skin in the game. All right? Part of that deal is, well, show us you're serious. And so there was a $65 million, essentially a success fee to TxDOT for developing the FCA and the rights thereof. So it was saying, you can't borrow that money. It's got to come out of your own check account to pay for it.
So it was sort of like that $65 million would be used for the project, but it was sort of like...
No, that $65 million went to TxDOT. So they invested $65 million into the company. The company wrote a $65 million check to TxDOT. And it was TxDOT's, I call it their success fee. There are other terms to use, but that's what it went to. So it's really rewarding. It was paying TxDOT or Texas for their award of this. And when you compete for these things, you'll get different types of stuff. And as I get in, bring me back to this and make sure I'm answering all your questions. So the next area is a subordinated loan and TIFIA. Who knows what TIFIA is? Transportation Infrastructure Financing and Innovation Act. It was a division of FHW, Federal Highway Administration. It's now called the Build America Bureau under the new administration. But its job was to support these. The secured lenders are not going to lend all the money that's there because it's too risky for them. Bringing in the U.S. government and the strength of the U.S. government, that's not going to have the first stake. So if the company quit paying, secured lenders could come in and take over the asset. TIFIA sits there and depends upon the secured lenders to take care of itself. So it's not a true secured loan. They have no way to lend. But by bringing TIFIA in, it really ensures success of getting all the rest of the financing. And so that was the package that was put together. About, I don't know, 1.1, 1.2, it rose over time, but that was essentially. And there were other equity calls that occurred during the life of the development of the roadway. But once the road opened, the company had 50 years to operate this roadway. And during that period of time, there would be no costs that would go to Texas, no TxDOT costs associated, but they would reap benefits for this. The highest in the nation revenue sharing exists on this job. Right now, today, 4 2/3 roughly cents of every dollar goes directly to TxDOT as revenue sharing. Over the course of this 50-year concession, I think in year 26 or 27, that goes to 9 and 9 1/3 or something. But by about years 45 through 50, it'll be up that TxDOT collects 50 cents on every dollar right off the top before anything else happens. So financially, it's a really good deal for TxDOT. I mentioned the other equity call. Under the FCA, there were different speed limits proposed, and the company agreed that if there was an 85-mile-per-hour speed limit, which they never believed in 1,000 years would ever happen, then they would pay $100 million. Well, lo and behold, TxDOT got a little tight in their construction programs. They came to the company and says, we're posting that road at 85 miles an hour. That's all right. Now, I mean, the people that negotiate and execute these deals are the smartest guys in the room. Just ask them. They are incredibly smart people, but that, you know, I tell everybody, I got up to 85 miles an hour on that road one time, and I was not comfortable at it. I'm a slow guy anyhow, but it's a very fast road. But TxDOT did that. Company had to, you know, the parents, you know, chucked out some more money, equity, to pay Texas another $100 million. Operations and maintenance. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? You got a road out there, you got to pick up the trash, you got to mow it, you got to take care of the pavements, the bridges, the traffic signal, and all of that. We have to collect tolls. This is the first in Texas. The company was hungry for this. It really wanted this to anchor them on the rest of the Trans-Texas corridor, but it also wanted to set up the real jewels of Texas is around Dallas. There are several toll roads and managed lanes that Centra is the operator on, but they were setting the stage. So they agreed to things, and they are more stringent than anything we've seen before. And it's like, how in the world can you agree to this? But they agreed to it. So we have to take care of the pavements in better condition than you'll ever find except on a brand new Texas road or Virginia road or California. Just pick your state. They're that stringent, and penalties kick in on it. So there are financial penalties when you don't meet those very stringent conditions. At the end of the concession, we have to hand back as an almost new facility, meaning that for the last 6 years of the project, we're going to be rehabilitating bridges, rehabilitating pavements, upgrading our systems, and all types of things. But there are some really good things for the company. We can't set our own tolls, but our tolls will never be reduced. There could be some supply and demand issues associated with that. We're still trying to understand that. But they'll never be reduced, and they automatically rise in lockstep with the Texas state domestic product and population growth around here. So they're very strong factors, so we see that being built in. Also, if you run a toll road, in the old days you threw a quarter in the basket and you kept on going, and so the toll collection risk was the slugs that got thrown in. You know, you can't spend a slug except in a toll basket. But as you've gone to more electronic, where you're reading license plate, reading text tags, you know, how good is that equipment for you? Well, we have shape files. We classify by shapes and not by axles. We take a picture, even if we can't get a text tag or a license plate, as long as we can say that is a box truck, a semi, a double, or a passenger vehicle, we get our money, even though TxDOT can't pay for that. So we have actually probably the lowest what's called toll leakage rate in the country because of that. Well, you sign an FCA, there's champagne flowing from all the financial places, the company gets to work, starts acquiring right-of-way and building it, and then you get to the road opening and everybody's full of smiles. These guys should not have been smiling so much. We say that traffic immediately falls short of projections. The company knew in 2010 that the projections on which the FCA was founded, on which they had their financing in place, they would not achieve them, and in fact, they would probably not even achieve 1/3 of those. Okay? When you base your payments back to your lenders on a cash stream, and you're not even achieving 1/3 of that cash stream, you know you have problems. The company, not one time in its history, paid its creditors. Never made an interest payment. Now, the senior secured goes through a period of several years of its interest-only payments. TIFIA's loan was 5 years after operations. Then it would be interest only, and then you would start paying interest and principal. The company never paid in any of its time because it couldn't afford to. It collected $12 million in the first year when it had projected collecting close to $40 million. It couldn't afford it, and it couldn't afford it because of some other things going on. I'll mention those in a minute. So that led us to file bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is a big thing, but we weren't the only company. the Indiana Toll Road, the Chicago Skyway. I don't think Pocahontas Parkway actually filed, but was moving that way. Roads and tunnels in Australia were failing. And can anybody guess what the common denominator of those failures were? There's a company named Monsell, M-A-U-N-S-E-L-L. If you Google that, the first thing that pops up is an American Statesman report of 2017 that TxDOT hired them to do their traffic and revenue work on I-35. Monsell was a really good traffic and revenue company. A lot of people wanted to work for them. As P3s started developing, it became important because a company will spend $2 or $3 million just on its proposal alone, not guaranteed that it has the work. Well, part of how you win the proposal is you're going to generate more revenues for the state. How do you generate more revenues? You got more traffic. The model that Monsell was working with these developers was they were being paid cost for their traffic and revenue studies and then a success fee when it was awarded. Anybody see any issue there, any conflicts? It brought down companies. I mean, Centra had bought the Indiana Toll Road. It failed. Went into bankruptcy, they lost it. Centra used those for here. It failed, and they lost. Macquarie, which was, international investor in infrastructure, got cleaned by these guys. They're still around. AECOM bought them. But anyway, there's a lesson there somewhere. So what all happened? The dream faded, and there was a beautiful dream about the Trans-Texas Corridor, but other people captured it and retold the story. And I'll get to that again in a minute. The Great Recession, what's a recession? Well, your neighbor just lost his job. What's a depression? Well, I lost mine. Well, it was bad. But if you discount all the effects of the recession against those traffic and revenue numbers I said before, they still missed it by over half. So they were overstated. The next to the last bullet, the road infrastructure began to fail. Before the construction was done, the road heaved, the road split and separated, slopes collapsed, and they kept plowing forward. They had a mandatory completion in November, or a substantial completion, acceptance of substantial completion, and they plowed ahead, they cut corners, and really didn't follow proper design, didn't follow proper construction. Today we've got over $100 million of work going on the road, trying to fix those problems. So that all contributed, and a company just couldn't do anything to pay off anybody. But bankruptcy removed $1.6 billion in debt. So I showed you one of a $1.1 billion. Here's how you get there. When you don't pay your interest, it capitalizes, it becomes principal. So you had all of that. The TIFI alone went up to 500 and something million dollars. The private guys went up to almost 900. But there was this beast called a swaption. Now what a swaption is a hedge that you take out at financing, betting that the interest rates are going to go north or south. So they spent, I think, $75 million on swaptions, betting that the interest rates would go up. What do you think happened with the recession? Those $75 million of swaps became $330 million of cost to the company that hit their books now as debt. So you go through bankruptcy under the bankruptcy process, all that debt gets obliterated. It completely goes away. The lenders become the owners of a much smaller company. So when we emerged from bankruptcy, as part of the bankruptcy plan, we arranged for $260 million of new financing on a 3-year term with the expectation it would be refinanced. So you go from $1.6 billion of intrinsic value to $260 million. Well, that's not what the enterprise value of the company is, but that's essentially what we had, $260 million in debt plus this asset looking forward. Our owners are equity funds and the U.S. government. And I don't have enough time to go start my rant there, so I won't. So here's some lessons that I really want you to take away, because there's a lot of misinformation out around toll roads in Texas, and this one in particular. TxDOT did not lose a single penny. None of the credit debtors, lenders got any money back. The company never missed a revenue sharing payment or paying the 22+ cents per transaction that they paid to TxDOT. TxDOT's made out well and been protected throughout this process. Being first to market in the private sector, Steve Jobs was all about being here first and making it better and doing this type of stuff. But in the public sector, that's not always the best place to be, because there's too many unknowns and too many new experiences that you're going to encounter that you can't de-risk at the start of it. And with TxDOT, having the hardest requirements is a slight victory, but it helped propel the company to bankruptcy, because the company couldn't keep the road to the condition, so it kept getting monetary penalties that accelerated the movement. And as a company, being overly aggressive in negotiations is generally is underlined by stupidity or results from stupidity, and there was a lot of stupidity in how hard they tried to get this, but they were banking on something, and it was important stuff. And then my fundamental rule, and I'll always say, and if you ever encounter it, whether it's a traffic and revenue consultant or a guy that's advising you on how much taxes you're going to collect for this new deal, this soccer stadium we're going to build for you, and we're going to give you all this land to build it for us, and how much you're going to make, take the knife out. Because the rating agencies that have to rate that are going to do it. The people that lend it are going to have to do it. And if you're in the public sector looking at this, you've got to do it too. So, political will is essential. So let's go back to the seeds of the failure. Bless you. Remember that alignment with all the different colors and all on it? And I said 1,200 feet, 5 of these, 4 different locations around the state. What do you think that line means if you own a house, or your school is here, or you've got a heritage farm or ranch? Well, it takes something that's very conceptual and makes it very personal. So what happened is, there was a great deal of controversy around this from landowners, because they were seeing a personal impact of this job on them. That started a level of mistrust between the public and the government that I call them the intentionally uninformed, or the willfully misinformed, the Alex Joneses of the world. Gave them an opening to come in and start really attacking toll roads in general. And they were very successful. I mean, the legislature has tied TxDOT's hands incredibly. It's hard for them, almost impossible for them to do anew, although everybody says they could, but it's just really hard. And so an important tool, I believe, has been taken from the toolbox. So this is my advertising. Look, what we decided to do was to get really serious about going back to the fundamentals on this road. We're going to fix it, then we're going to operate it efficiently. We're going to make it what it should have been from day one, because my first time on the road was the bluebonnets were blooming. My second trip was the sunflowers. It's a beautiful road. It's a rural road. Our traffic is growing. We got a sustainable capital structure, a financial structure. We got new owners that are willing to invest and help us obtain lending so that we can fix the road. I said $100 million earlier. That's because there was $20 million of bridge work that we're just now seeing that are because of the design and construction issues, we believe. And so the other thing they wanted to do was, Ferrovial, Centra are large Spanish enterprises. This road was a small division of a huge enterprise. Our owners said, get more focused with your communities. So we spend a lot of time working with communities and talking to them and getting much more involved in that. We want to be as transparent as we can, even with a private company. So I'm hoping, and these are my hopes, that we see more investment up front before we take a lot of wealth out of these jobs. That would be my hope. Instant gratification is okay, but when you're dealing with a toll road and the variances of traffic, you just, it's a personal thing. Traffic projections, we're already seeing them be less aggressive, much more, using many more factors, economic factors that go into these than have traditionally done. And the other thing is, you go to an urban system, like 1 through 4 is essentially an urban commuter road, where you go up to Dallas, the North Tarrant Expressway. Those are urban roadways. They have a pent-up demand. Are y'all familiar with the movie Field of Dreams? Build it and they will come. Well, this is what sections 5 and 6 are. We built it, but they've never come. So a rural road is going to be much harder to drive sustainability through. So I'm sorry I talked so long. I get wound up, but I'm happy to answer any questions or all, and I'll hang out. I mean, it's up to y'all. No.
Maybe we could take some questions for our speaker? Got some questions.
Well, did your equity question get answered?
I don't know that I understand.
Okay.
Equity theory, so I may not. Well, actually, I had another kind of in the weeds question about like the contract that governs
Mm-hmm.
the maintenance of the road. Is that the same as the initial award contract?
Yes. So are you familiar with a performance-based contract?
In a different field.
Okay, well, it's the same concept. You're going to reach a certain level of performance. In highways, it's a certain condition. So you measure pavements by roughness and cracking and joining, but an ideal pavement is smooth, essentially. Is that right? It's an engineering row. So you measure that. Our road, for every 1/10 of a mile, has a 9/500ths roughness, which is incredible. Anybody working pavements yet? No, it's pretty incredible and stuff. But it's like that, so we have to achieve it at that. We have to keep the bridges under a national rating up a condition 7 or greater and those types of things. So it's very outcome. Doesn't prescribe how we do anything, but it sets a threshold for what we have to achieve.
And then TxDOT just manages that contract.
We actually co-manage an independent engineer. So we co-fund. I would say TxDOT manages it, but that independent engineer goes out and every quarter pulls out representatives of 40 sections of roadway, 10th mile sections, and measures those and assesses our performance and scores us. Yes, sir.
Do you think it's unfair that TxDOT didn't lose anything in this whole battle that happened? Well, not battle, but situation that unfolded. Do you think they should have had something invested in the roadways at the end? They're going to get a brand new roadway, like you said.
No,
Okay.
no. I mean, the deal's the deal, okay? And I don't want to ever negotiate because I'm so bad. But if you and I agree to something, and I don't deliver on mine, why should that come back on the state? Because there are a lot of people. I can guarantee you, there were people that were involved in developing and building this road and getting it open that made huge annual bonuses, even though we believe they were cutting corners with the design and the construction. That shouldn't be TxDOT's issue to deal with. And look, you saw my history. I come out of a highway department. My mother was a secretary in a school, my father worked for the federal government as a mining engineer. I come out of a bent that government can do really good things. But government is not there to protect rich people's, well, it used not to be, but I guess it is now. Ensure that rich people can do what they want to do.
I've got a question.
Sure.
Would it be fair to say that the equity that you were discussing, that $65 million, that's Sintra, Zachary, and Concession paying TxDOT for the right to the concession, essentially. So
Yes.
They're anticipating they're gonna be making money over this 50-year period from tolls, and that 65 million is a, you know, show of good faith, like, here, this is worth it to us, right? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And are there any financial folk in the room? Because I'll butcher this. Everybody starts out with what's called an internal rate of return calculation, which is the net present discounted value of future earnings through a calculation. And they put thresholds. Our calculations that we've done back to the envelope on this road for the original sponsors was probably somewhere around 30 to 35% per year, when making 12 to 15% is really good for a contractor. For an O&M company that's just maintaining and operating the roadway, 10 or 11% is really good. So they saw a lot of money. The $65 million was easy for them. Buying all the right-of-way, $130 million of right-of-way that they bought, that was easy. The only thing got hard was TxDOT asked for the $100 million after they knew that 35% IRR was not going to be achieved, and that they would need to put in another $200 million of equity before the company could start paying on debt. So.
I think part of the controversy vis-a-vis these larger kind of bypass or interstate extension toll roads was in some of the contracts, not exactly where that happened, the private concessionaire got an agreement that there wouldn't be certain sorts of improvements to the competing public infrastructure. And I think that roiled a lot of people in terms of like, so we can't improve our public highways because we've made this agreement with this company. I mean, A, is that true? And B, do you see that as problematic?
It's absolutely true. And it's a major conundrum. Investors, lenders want to know that they're going to get their money back. So they have these competing facilities clauses in all of them. Every one that I've ever known has competing facilities clauses, which says, with the exception of I-35, TxDOT and the counties can make any improvement they want to make. But if it affects our traffic, then they have to pay us for it. Other places, there are ironclad restrictions. Is if I build this road, there's a road, the Dulles Greenway connects to the Dulles Toll Road, runs from Loudoun County through Fairfax County. There is a parallel road, Route 7, 6-lane road through Fairfax County and parts of Loudoun, and reduces. Under the Greenway's original deal, you couldn't improve Route 7, period. We couldn't even go out there and provide turn lanes when traffic was backing up without. So when they got to the point where they needed something from us, we pounced all over that to get it changed. But the original language of that. So these competing facilities are something, and I debated because I don't know where I want to be. I don't want a toll road to stop much needed public infrastructure, but they could. I don't want a toll road dragging its feet to provide additional capacity. And I've seen that happen. Because you get to a point where we're all going to go do our IRR calculations. What's our return on this investment? Is it gonna be a good investment for us? And if it's not, if it doesn't cross that threshold, even though it's needed, it's not going to happen until the economics drive it. So they're in all of them, but I don't know an alternative, and I wish there was a better alternative.
Is there some nuance with those clauses? I mean, I understand I think the first one that sort of blew up was the SR 91 in Southern California. Caltrans wanted to go and make improvements on an adjacent road and they couldn't, and that's what caused it to go back into public ownership.
Right.
But is there some level of, improvement that can be tolerated on adjacent roads that helps protect the public? Or, I'm not sure, is there a way that can be crafted that's kind of a compromise?
Hayes County wants to improve 151 or 150 and 21. And one of our guys said, well, that'll just take traffic up to 35 and off of us. So we could have raised it as a competing and gone through that process. We looked at it a little differently because 35, who wants to drive up and get on 35 at Kyle and then come north? I mean, geez, even I wouldn't do that. So realistically, we said this will help us. And I think that as long as roads are making a lot of money, then they're much more willing to accept competing facilities as long as they don't see it. I think we need to have better ways to sit down and talk. And it goes back to we seem to be in an era where we've lost the ability to sit down and talk rationally and believe what the other person's saying. And it's kind of, I really believe very strongly in you act transparently. So when I have a problem, I go to TxDOT and I say, I got a problem, I can't meet this, but here's what's the implications and here's what I'll do, and we kind of sit and share and work through these things. I don't think there's a lot of that level of trust between the public agencies and these toll roads today. I know there's not a lot in Virginia, there's not a lot of love lost between the private toll roads there. North Carolina, the governor's trying to figure a way to take the concession away from the lender. So we're just in this bad place, I think. So, and I wish I had an answer, but I really don't.
Yeah, so with things like toll roads and this user pay principle for infrastructure kind of coming back onto the scene, right? Starting or had footholds in the rail industry and previous road industries.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think this will affect access to this, road infrastructure or, future, let's talk water or electricity infrastructure that has traditionally been this kind of quasi-public good, and now we're putting this barrier to entry on it, or reinforcing this kind of barrier to entry on it?
You mean by going through a public-private, letting a private provider?
This kind of like pay per mile, this kind of user pay principle of infrastructure financing.
I'm sorry, so what were you asking? I understand.
How this will impact access to infrastructure.
Okay.
Access
Look,
in the future.
there,
If it will.
so in theory, by providing access through this vehicle to a specific population here, you free up public dollars to address the broader population. That's the theory behind going to P3s. I don't think it always works that way because you still have state legislative bodies. So here's my view of life. You got Congress at the very top. They can't get anything done because all the deal makers are gone and no one likes each other. Plus, they're only back in their districts for a very short period of time. They never see anyone. State legislatures come together and, you're fortunate in Texas that they only meet every 2 years. But then they meet for almost 6 months. Virginia, you have a 60-day session to do the budget. Next year, you have a 45-day session. And that's way too much. But they're not there with their constituencies for broader periods of time, and they're more aloof. You get into local governments and criminies. You go to school for your kids, and you're running into your constituents. You're at the grocery store. Your constituents are surrounding you. You can't do anything but figure solutions to this. And I believe that when we start thinking in those terms, let's solve this piece over here. But that solves that piece. I still have this larger piece. So I'm not going to take my revenue stream and just butcher it because I've got this piece solved. I've still got this other. And I think we have to start looking at it in those terms. And go back and think. TxDOT's budget's maybe $9 billion a year. And someone said, well, they're going to take a third of our budget and go over here and use it. Well, had the private sector undertaken the entire, in one fell swoop, would the legislature have allowed TxDOT to have a $9 billion budget? Probably not. They would have cut the budget, because then I'm returning taxes, I'm reducing government, all those really good things. So, I'm sorry, I ramble.
Oh, no, that was great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a quick question. Was there a strong backlash from the general public about the 85 mile an hour speed limit? And looking back, do you think that the 85 speed limit was the right decision?
All right. Everything I've heard is that I can't wait to get on that road and drive that fast. Okay. So with the exception of probably emergency responders and the police and traffic engineers, I don't think there are a lot of people overly concerned with that speed limit. What was the second part?
Do you personally feel that the 85, that was the right decision to make?
TxDOT had a need. They had a $100 million need or more. The company had committed to satisfying that $100 million need. I don't know what the need was that TxDOT had. I don't even know where that $100 million went and how it was used. But I got to believe that it was important to them, or they wouldn't have made the 85 mile per hour speed limit happen on this road. Is that answering your question? I confuse myself, so.
Thanks. I wanted to understand a little bit more about this consulting company that got some bad projections for several of these companies, like a little bit more about how maybe they came up with these figures, and what sort of consequences did they experience when it showed that they were overestimated?
Let's start with consequences. They're still embroiled in a lot of legal things right now. A once thriving independent company is now, I think, a division of AECOM. So from a company's, consequences, there have been several. So how do you get to the point of overestimating? Well, you start this way. Man, if I am on the successful team with this, it's going to mean a lot of money for us. And so, and when you do traffic projections, when you do all kinds of projections, you make assumptions. And you make assumptions on ranges. Well, you're starting to force the trend on the top end of the range rather than the bottom end of the range with that very fundamental thing. Then you get your traffic projections and you go, I'm all happy. I look at these really great traffic and revenue numbers. You give them to the sponsor, the owner, this company. Well, it's got to drive more than this. Did you look at this? Did you consider this? Did you consider that? Go back and work it. And there's an iterative process that goes through those. And so you start with assumptions that are always, daisies and sunshine and rainbows. And they multiply and feed upon it. So it's a terrible cycle, but it happens. And it happened on this road, and it happened on other roads. Yes, sir.
With respect to your experience in working in infrastructure provision in Africa, I'm interested to hear your perspective on kind of the new players in that realm, namely China, and if you think that the investments that they're doing to kind of expand all sorts of infrastructure all over Africa is, good or bad.
Wow. What a great question, and I would never have expected that question here. China cleans our clock everywhere. They go in, they have a very simple model. You want this road built? No questions asked. They go in, they bring in Chinese labor force, Chinese equipment, everything, they build it. Power plant, water plant, road. They build it and turn it over to the government. They don't ask the first question about good governance. They don't have any requirements on theirs. It is truly a gift, but as they're giving these gifts, they're embedding themselves in different portions of the local economy, the national economy for the African nations. We saw it in South Sudan when it took us about 2.5 years to get a road built, and that's just getting a year and a half of it getting through all the government bureaucracies and everything, and a year to build a road. China came in, built similar road for not South Sudan, but Sudan in about 6 months. No strings attached. They just came in and built it. In Kenya, upgrading the airport, the road to the airport and all this, they bring in the workforce, they do it. And they don't ask the first question about, you know, are you going to be a good are you going to provide good government, you're going to treat your citizens right or anything like this. And they're embedding themselves, creating goodwill. And now when Kenya decides to open up, I can't remember the port, up in the northeast corner, that's going to pull in oil and natural gas from the northeastern part of Kenya and the southeastern part of South Sudan, guess who's going to build the port? Guess who's going to build the pipelines? So, and guess who's going to offtake the oil and gas that comes there? It's going to be the Chinese. I mean, they're brilliant at it, but we're hamstrung by our government ethics and how everybody should do them the same way we do things, although it's a little scary these days.
Maybe we can take one more question.
Yeah, I just had, and this is in regards to the northern section of this
Mhm.
30. You said that was a great success. I think that their initial projections were 50% understated.
Yes, they were.
And so I guess it's a going thing because it was a different financial structure, probably less costly financial structure if you figure out the way TxDOT took the fund. But so in terms of traffic, how successful? The other thing I was curious about, because this whole thing was sold back in the early aughts as a big truck bypass.
Right.
Get all the trucks on, get all the trucks from NAFTA off. And through, observation, driving over it, which is, likely to be incredibly inaccurate, I don't see that much truck traffic.
Yeah.
So could you tell a little bit about
Yeah.
kind of what the kind of current traffic flow and kind of mix of vehicles?
So yeah, so let me. When the first section opened by itself, there wasn't a lot. The second section opened, it connected some logical points. It started to become a commuter route as it evolved. And remember what I said about the interstate system. Great to connect state capitals, but ultimately became the urban commuter road. And sections 2 and 3, I guess, are just hugely commuter roads. They're widening those. They're making a lot of money. Since the earliest traffic and revenue projections, they've exceeded their subsequent traffic and revenue projections every time. With regard to mix, on our road, we're probably running now about 27%, 28% truck traffic, which is huge truck traffic for an interstate style road. That's driving 60% of our revenues now. So it's a very good deal. When you get on, even on I-35, during certain periods of times, you got a lot of truck traffic on it, but it's not that great a percentage of it. There is a lot of truck traffic, a lot of through truck traffic that's emanating down below New Braunfels. You've got a Walmart center, you got Amazon down there, you got other types of things that are doing. And in our work with those and talk with those folk, they talk to us about running up 35 to hit 45 and then taking the northern piece. But 1 through 4 is truly a commuter road right now. So your volume of truck traffic is probably down in the 7, 8, 9% range overall. one of the things that we're hearing from those you know, Walmart and others, Schneider and people that are hauling, is if we had a better way to get over from 35 to SH-130, they would be using it routinely. So we're actually looking at a concept that the company spent a lot of time with when they realized they weren't going to make money, trying to create a southern connector that would siphon truck traffic off of I-35 northbound, essentially, predominantly, and bring it over to the roadway. So we're resurrecting those and seeing if there is a case to be made for developing that as a free road.
And the cutoff from 10, that's not generally.
Well, so it's surprising. Our passenger vehicles are getting off at 183 and heading to points east. When we've done long distance origin and destination, the traffic that goes all the way to I-10 disperses incredibly. And we don't really see clear O and D, the origin or the destination down there. And it's not convenient, really, to get to San Antonio. It was never intended to be to San Antonio. So we're going to skirt on the east and south side of San Antonio like it does Austin before it took a beeline over to Laredo. And I-10 is a terrible road. I don't know. So I don't know. I wander too much. I apologize. So, but thank you all for having me. I appreciate it.